Good afternoon, everyone, or at least it's afternoon when I'm recording this. This is the beginning in a series of videos to accompany our class in legal and ethical issues in business. Now, you're going to see me looking down from time to time because I'm basing the short comments I make here on the PowerPoint slides that you're going to find accompanying the class. So every once in a while, I'm sure it's going to appear that I am looking at the floor, and that's just to kind of remind me of the topics that I want to hit on. Yeah, I guess as a precursor to our discussion, we should talk about the reason we even have this class. I guess it's somewhat unfortunate that we can open the newspaper, go to an online website, or listen to any of the local TV station news reports and hear of the ethical lapses that have occurred in our city, in our state, in our country, and around the world. It's sad, really, isn't it? It's kind of a sad indictment of our society that we need to take some time to remind people of the value of ethical behavior and of maybe more so our obligation to act ethically as we treat others in our personal and professional life experiences. Well, let's take a look at those PowerPoint slides. You know, the beginning of our chapter talks about ethics, and we see that discussion in a couple of different forms. First, we see the discussion of ethics as our personal set of guidelines for what's right and wrong. And we see our authors expand that to be more specific in terms of business ethics, principles, values, guidelines we use to perform our day-to-day responsibilities in the business world. Now, listen, I've always heard that you'll really know what a person's ethical values are by what they do when no one's around. Now, we don't get to see that, but really, how we behave when no one's watching, how we conduct ourselves when there's not a camera in front of us, really lets people know where that moral compass we have points. I firmly believe that each of us have this inner moral compass, and for some of us, it points to true north. We're going to conduct ourselves as we would expect others to conduct themselves when working with us. But you and I both know that unfortunately, not everybody takes that point of view. The interesting thing in my mind here that our book doesn't really hit on is this. We have that set of personal ethics, and you would think they would normally go from that personal setting to our professional setting, and they don't always automatically do that. Let me give you an example. In our personal lives, we would never think of stealing anything. Okay, you hear the word steal, you hear the idea of taking something that you haven't paid for, taking something that doesn't belong to you, and personally, we would go, yeah, I wouldn't do that. But you know, people kind of do that in their business lives because they see this gray area between right and wrong. And let me give you an example. At any business in the world, you are probably provided with pencils, you're probably provided with pens, you're probably provided with copy paper, and it's for your professional use while you're at that business, right? But you know what people do? They'll grab a ream of copy paper and take it on home and put it in their printer. You know that they'll grab a box of pencils, take them on home, hand them out to the kids, hand them out to the grandkids, and we don't see that as stealing, right? Our standards are a little bit different. We have, for some reason, this different view of what is acceptable behavior in the business world and what is unacceptable behavior in the business world. All right, let me let me flash forward for just a minute. This chapter takes some time to walk us through different time periods and discuss the way in which ethics were viewed and applied in the corporate world. Pre 1960s, you know, before the 1960s, we saw a very different set of ethics applied in the workplace than we did at home, and even more so dramatic of difference at the turn of the century. Oh my gosh, it was just crazy. Do you remember your history classes? Do you remember the robber barons of old? In the late 1890s, early 1900s, we were just moving to this industrial economy, and people were coming off the farm into towns and going to work in the factories. And I'm telling you that employers who owned those factories treated people as if they were tools. Industrial accidents happened all the time, and business owners didn't care. If you fell over on the floor, you know what they did? They picked you up, pulled you out, tossed you aside, and put somebody else in there. Wow. I mean, what a difference in the way we were treated at work. And those business owners, they saw no ethical problem at all. 1960s, we started coming together as a group to say that businesses ought to conduct themselves in a manner that's more like the way we expect individuals to conduct themselves. They should behave in specific ways. We actually saw the President Kennedy, go so far as to develop the Consumer Bill of Rights. And I didn't write down what page this was. Consumer Bill of Rights, he talked about through like page 11 and through page 12. Bill of Rights, you have the right to have a product perform properly, to get information about that product, not to be injured. Societally, we got together and said, okay, we need to start making some changes in the ethical practices of those business owners. 1970s, 1960s, and 1970s, I think of as kind of the hippie years where we became cause heads. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because banding together to address unethical behavior in business is a very worthwhile cause. Now, our authors use the term social responsibility, so you can look for that throughout this chapter and through the remainder of the book. But not only social responsibility, more specifically corporate social responsibility. We started to address firms more specifically in terms of how we wanted them to behave, to be good neighbors, not to pollute, not to take advantage of people, not to put unsafe products out there, those kinds of things. In the 1980s, things like the DII, Defense Industry Initiatives, arose to begin spelling out guidelines. You know, we've had these discussions in the 60s and 70s about wanting businesses to act more appropriately. This began to reduce our expectations to paperwork, all right? So now businesses actually had incentives to follow those guidelines because there were financial rewards for doing so and punishment associated with those times when they didn't conduct themselves properly. That kind of followed through in the 90s to those FSGOs that you saw in there, Federal Sentencing Guidelines for Organizations. Again, just more laws enacted to work as the impetus for businesses to do what they should be doing. Now, more recently, in this last decade or so, we've seen the development of laws like the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act really put in place a method for us to hold those executives at these big businesses personally responsible. Oh my gosh, you know, we for a while saw these top executives at organizations falsifying financial statements. They would rob and pillar their companies blind, and nothing ever happened to them. Really, nothing ever happened to them. Well, now we can go back to those individuals who are robbing their companies blind and find them, take away their assets, and try to reimburse people who were harmed by what their corporations did. I'll give you an example. Years ago, there was this guy named Dennis Tyco. Dennis Kozlowski, he worked at Tyco International. This guy was taking money from the company left and right. He was doing crazy things with it. He bought a gold umbrella stand. Okay, this is just hard to believe. $25,000 gold umbrella stand. It was a picture of a lion. His mouth was open. His wife was having a birthday, and this Kozlowski, this schmuck, takes money from the company and buys his wife an island. I'm not kidding you, bought his wife an island. Well, we finally found out what was going on. He had been falsifying financial statements, and we were led to believe that things were going good when they were really going bad. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act, it's legislation that helps us hold those individuals more accountable for the unacceptable practices that they've been engaging in. Well, that's just kind of a short clip to accompany Chapter 1. I hope this gives you a little more interesting information to supplement the reading that you've done. You're going to find other videos to follow up with this soon.